Now, this is a very interesting concept because it tallies in with what this William Thompkins has actually had to say about the nature of the projects that we've seen running. For example, the Apollo. So I will give you a synopsis of what he describes the Apollo missions, what they were. Now, this isn't just some conspiracy theorist guy. This is a guy who worked in aerospace for his whole life. And he was one of their prominent, important engineers. So let's see what the so-called space engineers who worked on space engineering has to say. His idea was that the Apollo mission was a mission that we don't know about. And his obituary was, I think, in 2017. Yeah. And he started going public with it sometime before he left the world. Obviously, he had been silenced. He wasn't allowed to discuss it because of national security. But I think that there had been a certain period of time where he was too old and he was like, you can't touch me anymore anyway. You know, what are you going to do? And so he did go public with it. But it could be disinformation. It could just be more nonsense thrown into the pan. But let's hear what he had to say. So his idea was that the Apollo mission was actually to go to the moon and facilitate a base. He also speaks extensively about the Nordic tribes, who he describes them as being our cousins from elsewhere. His words. He claims that on the projects that he worked on, there were 3 Nordic, what do you call them, exchange personnel working in alignment with his engineering team to make sure that they completed certain specs for craft design. He also points out that the moon was to be colonized and to create a base on the moon, and from there to create a base on Mars, and from there to create bases on all of the planets that could be base created in our solar system, or the moons on the planets for places the planets couldn't be. So the moon on Saturn, certain moons in Jupiter possibly, but to find places to create bases. And from there, expand beyond our solar system into other solar systems. And so this was the original plan of that particular series of missions, according to a guy who was working there. And according to him, they had Nordic people working with him. In fact, he speaks of one of the Nordic women, and this is very interesting. He said she was the spitting image of and he shows photographs of her and the 2 Nordic men, very beautiful people, by the way. And she looks the spitting image of that psychic that was part of the Reich.
Maria
What
Orsic.
was her name? I forget her name.
Maria.
Sorry?
Maria Orsic.
Yes.
Yeah.
Beautiful, gorgeous woman. And she was the one who channeled all the technology from the crystal ball for the Reich to build their Vril machines that used warp technology. In other words, gravitational warp technology of propulsion. And she was one of the psychics that worked closely with this certain part of the SS team that were like the psychic navigators. And they had this communication running with beings from elsewhere. This is interesting, what cosmic you're talking about, you know. And when you talk about extraterrestrials, this is why if you look in the write-up, I mentioned plasma beings. Because I don't think all beings are necessarily physical. And I think what we're experiencing as a plasma being is a being that is elsewhere, but able to sort of brush against this world to a point.
I think another term for what you're talking about is, have you ever heard of the term ultra-terrestrial? That kind of sounds like what you're talking about, where it's like a being that's not quite physical, kind of moves in between physical reality and the astral world is kind of in between. I've been using that. That's another term that some people use. I don't know if you heard it before or not.
It's a nice term, ultra terrestrial, like beyond terrestrial. And I think a lot of the technology of these, what you call ultra terrestrial beings, they possibly have, some of them have high levels of technology that can phase their consciousness bodies into our phasing of matter, and possibly phase their energy into other states. Some of them possibly